Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Honshu Sub-Hilt Wakizashi from BudK. And if you're interested in one, there's going to be links and measurements and all that kind of stuff in the description down below. Do note that this is a review sample from the folks at BudK. If you think that makes me biased, then you know at the start. Also note that I'm not terribly familiar with this kind of tactical Wakizashi kind of stuff. I know it is an emulation, or the inspiration is drawn from Japanese style stuff, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, but this is, well, it's in silhouette perhaps similar to Japanese stuff, but not really in application. So I'm unfamiliar, I'm a novice. Keep that context in mind as you see me swinging it around and elaborating on its tactical usefulness. I'm going to kind of get into build quality and all of that kind of stuff, show you close-up images. I'm going to do some cutting with it. I'm going to push the blade to failure, and that's the purpose of this video. Hopefully it'll help you decide if it is worth your money or not, which incidentally is $103 at least as of the recording of this video. There's a link in the description that will bring you to the website if you want to get one. Do know that I don't receive any commission or compensation from that link, but it does track how many people go there from this video. So if you want to show the folks at BudK that I am useful and that you got information from me, perhaps clicking the link will let them know that traffic is generated. Or don't, whatever you want to do. The purpose is to help you determine if it's worth your money or not, not to actually sell it to you. So I'll go over a bits, bob, fit features, tell you about swinging it around, push it to failure. That's what you're going to see here. So first, I'm going to start with the pommel. And oddly, this is the, well, put a little bit of a showstop in the review as it is at the moment. And that's because it kind of just came off. Surprise. So the question is, what did it take to do that? I'll elaborate on it a little bit more, but since we're starting with it, effectively I did chop some logs, I chopped some boar, I chopped some things that are debatably abusive, but I didn't actually notice the pommel come off at the time. When I went to go do some photos with it, though, because the things that I cut didn't diminish the condition, I was taking some photos and base video for the review, I noticed that there was a slight gap between the grip and kind of where the pommel started, and from there it just kind of twisted off. And what I can see about the pommel is the construction looks like this is supposed to be threaded, but it doesn't look like it is. It looks like the adhesive filled in all of the threads, and it kind of pulls straight on and straight off, and none of the threads really grab anything. It doesn't look like it's broken. It looks like the threads maybe weren't the right size, or I'm not exactly sure, but it's just held on with a bit of adhesive on a steel, kind of cylindrical bit of tang that's sticking out here, and then adhesive dried on, and that's not going to be secure enough for, I think, what this is intended for. I don't know if I just got a dud, but in any case, it came off. I didn't notice it. It didn't fortunately come off in cutting. It came off later when I was photographing, and I was like, what's that? And then I twisted it, and it kind of came off. I didn't twist it hard either. It would start to wiggle around pretty easily. So apart from the somewhat glaring, perhaps, deficiency in construction method, what about the rest of the pommel? I like it, actually. I can take it off and show it to you this way. The basic gist is this thing is pretty comfortable, and the way it was assembled, I like the feel of it in my hand. I know some people don't like the little diamond kind of pistol grip kind of feel on this thing. I don't actually mind it even in a bare hand. I didn't find it uncomfortable while I was cutting outside, cutting brush, things like that. It might get old after a time, but I didn't find it to be problematic with some light and medium cutting. I also like the way this rests. I like the way my hand can go down to get more reach from the blade. I can choke down. It makes the grip useful for the entirety of the length. If I want more control, I can go up here, or I can keep my hand further down by the pommel. And the end bits right here are chamfered in such a way and have cutouts in such a way that the fat of my hand rests in them comfortably, and there aren't any pokey bits that jut out and stab me. There's a little bit of discomfort, which is common, I guess, going down to some ledges here. I can feel them, and it would probably hurt a little bit if I impacted something, but honestly, it's not terribly uncomfortable. There's also a hole right here for a lanyard. I'm not sure exactly why it's cut out this way, apart from looks or perhaps weight savings, but it does have some potential benefit in that the meat of my hand rests in these kind of cutouts, and it's actually surprisingly comfortable. There's no hot spots or anything like that. The edges are softened, and it does have a, granted a kind of a tactical kind of look, but I don't actually mind it. And anyway, the pommel and design of it was quite comfortable. Moving up to the grip, So these have a kind of rubber, well, not rubber, like plasticky feel to them. Later in the review, I'll take it off, I'll expose the tang, and I'll look underneath the hood. I'm not going to do that at this point, but you'll see it later on in the review when I push the blade a little bit more. But I do like the general assembly of the grip. There is one that is made without a sub-hilt, so if you don't like this thing, this little extra bit right here, this is the sub-hilt, at least as I understand it, then they make a version without it. I do find it to be an interesting kind of contrast. On one hand, it kind of locks your hand in, and that can be good. On the other hand, you can't as easily kind of twist the blade around in your hand and manipulate your grip when you're locked into the sub-hilt. However, there's just a lot of versatility in the grip. I felt comfortable, and in some of the cuts I did, I held it a little further down. I found that to be a comfortable spot. If I wanted more control, particularly over the tip, I feel that in this position, that option is also there. Incidentally, when you hold this in the sub-hilt, you do really feel locked into the weapon. It doesn't move around. I feel like I can twist, I can thrust and twist and maintain a lot of control, like it's not going to twist or bend around in my hand. And the general shape of the grip, even though I haven't really used it with like wet hands or gloves or anything like that, but just in general, this grip is pretty sticky. If I hold it in my hand and try to twist, the edge stays in one spot. It's locked in pretty good. These little diamond cutout patterns serve their purpose in keeping it, giving you a pretty secure grip, giving you something tactily to grab onto and make it feel really secure in your hand. And I'm harping on that a little bit. Very often with some smoother and, albeit maybe more cosmetically appealing grips, they can just slip around in your hand. It seems a simple thing, like a grip should make you feel connected to the weapon really well. It's often overlooked. This might be a little bit sharp for some folks, but I appreciate that it feels really locked and secure in my hand. The little finger swells here are comfortable. I don't notice them so much. But I do like that I can hold this in effectively 3 positions. I can hold it up at the sub-hilt, I can hold it a little further down, the finger swell is there, but it's really the little diamond pattern that keeps me locked in, or I can go all the way down at the end of the hilt here, and I think all of them are effective for different reasons. So it's a pretty versatile grip. I do see little hex bolts in here that look like they will allow me to take the grip off. I'll test that at a later point. There's a 4th grip as well. If you turn the pommel this way, you can slide the sword another direction. That's a joke. Anyway, rest of the build quality, this does feel kind of cheap, plasticky. I can see why if you bought this for $103, it's on a budget. Maybe you'd want to replace the grip with something, some other kind of different material that you found more pleasing. As it is, though, I didn't think I'd like it as much as I do. It's comfortable, functional. The sub-hilt doesn't have anything that chews on my finger so much. It does have this little swell in the middle here, but again, not sharp. And I've seen these sub-hilts done really, really poorly in the past. This has little indentations on it where my fingers rest comfortably, and if I jam it into kind of the between my fingers, there's no particularly sharp ledges. So if you loosen your grip and it gets away from you a little bit, it's at least not going to make you bleed too much. This guard that sweeps down, I haven't found that it jutted into my finger or anything like that. It isn't such a configuration that I feel like I can hold it with a finger over. I don't think it's made for that configuration, but this is not comfortable. There's no other grip that's particularly comfortable past the sub-hilt. The guard is also nice. There's not huge gaps between the guard and the blade, which is something I like to see. It's pretty small. This is a sword, a Japanese style sword. It doesn't have a habaki or anything like that. It has a very small little ricasso area that perhaps adds some sort of retention in the scabbard in terms of friction fitting, but it doesn't have that component that a Japanese style sword would have. It's still nice to see tight machining tolerances. Anyway, it's overall reasonably nice. I haven't hit the guard with anything like that. It doesn't offer much in the way of hand protection, but it's sufficient, and it certainly keeps your hand from sliding up. The guard is, even without all of this kind of wangus on here, it would probably keep your hand from sliding up. The scabbard, before I move on to the blade, actually pretty tight. It doesn't fall out. It requires quite a bit of force to completely fully secure it. Likewise, it requires some to pull it out, but not so much that if you had it strapped to a bag or something like that, I'm pretty confident it wouldn't be bouncing all over the place and coming out. At the same time, it looks like it's got a little bit of friction fit here, and there's no mechanical lock or anything like that. So over time, it's likely going to degrade. It may change depending on humidity. So for me, right now, it's quite tight, but that could certainly change over time. As it is, though, I'd feel pretty comfortable strapping it onto a backpack or something like that, or keeping it at my side and not having it fall out. But if I really needed to, I could, with a single hand, pull it and deploy the weapon. It's got a simple, kind of satin finish on the scabbard, which is made of wood. It's wrapped in this leather wrap, and then it has a Japanese style sageo over it, which is a little bit goofy. Now this, on a Japanese style sword, is called a kurigata. If it was Japanese style, it's too far down. It should be a lot further up. This rests in your obi, in your belt, and when you're looking for if your scabbard has turned, you kind of slap it on the you can feel it with your hand. It's also on the wrong side for where it would typically be on a Japanese style sword. Would be on the other side and quite a bit further up. So this is likely placed for visuals and not for any not to be used in like a traditional Japanese garb, though. I mean, obviously. But if you're not going to put it in the right spot, or in the spot that it's conventionally used to serve the purpose that it typically does, I don't know why it would be on here, but perhaps it gives you some sort of area to tie this onto a backpack or something like that. Though these, incidentally, are not typically any more than just kind of glued in. So I don't know that this would be the most like secure point to lock it onto a backpack or something like that. So again, a kind of point of curiosity, these often break off. They don't they don't serve as great mounting positions very often. And the leather, it's neat looking, but I'm not sure entirely what purpose it serves. At the same time, there's a lot of this that's aesthetic, and it's also a budget piece, and I think they're trying to make something cool on a budget, and I think, frankly, it's achieved. At the same time, I see that there's some money spent, and I'm not entirely sure what the purpose is to have anyway. So that's my curiosity. If I put it, this is almost left-handed, which is odd, so I'd put it this way so I could feel the sageo or the kurigata with my hand, and it would jut out from a belt quite a bit, because usually the kurigata doesn't go through your belt all the way if you stuffed it in there. So anyway, at least in the traditional Japanese style sense, it's a little bit off. But I've harped on that enough and talked about the scabbard probably enough. But before I actually move on, there are some other little notes. It doesn't rattle, which is nice, doesn't fall out, and it has a reasonably smooth, not terribly loud draw. If you get water in it, though, it doesn't look like there's any spot for it to go, and it's wood in there, so if you use it as a camping tool or something like that and put a lot of debris in there, it seems like it's going to be a little tricky to clean, so I suppose keep that in mind. The blade. So supposedly this is made of 1060. I say that not because I doubt it, but just because I have no way of validating. And there's some charm to this blade. I like that it has these double fullers here. There's a name of the style of bohi, which is in Japanese, it starts with an F, and I can't remember what it is, but I like it. I think it's an attractive feature. It has a not quite hollow ground, but it almost gives the impression of a hollow ground blade, but one primary bevel and a pretty steep secondary bevel, which is pretty consistent with the exception of the tip where it goes a little kittywampus. There is also a kind of I like the grinding that they've done here to kind of impersonate a yakote, or this line that you typically see that designates the top of a Japanese style sword. It looks like it's just brushed a little bit the other way. There's not like a physical, it's not like it's hollow ground up here or something like that, but not expected for a blade in this price point. And it has for a kind of wire brush sanded look. I think it's actually very, very handsome given the price point. I do see on one side it says 1060 high carbon steel. On the other you have this Honshu thing, and then, or the Honshu symbol here, and then on the front of this little ricasso nubby section it says China. Profile, it has a kind of gentle curvature. I'll put specs and measurements and all that malarkey in the description down below if you're curious. The blade is not particularly sharp, so it is sharp enough to have technically an edge, but it's really not very sharp at all. So I have not sharpened it at the point in this video yet, and it certainly could use one. I've heard that these take a reasonable edge, but I haven't done it at this point in the video. Getting back to the point here, I did this part of the recording now because this is already a big enough issue for me where I would stop. It's not built well. The pommel coming off is unacceptable given how much I've done. Now, if the blade bent or something like that, given what I've done, I would say that's acceptable, you know, not ideal, but I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker. However, the pommel, you know, coming off after what I've cut when it did, I don't think is acceptable. This may be a dud, but it is the only one that I have to review, and to me, that really kills the recommendation. So already here, I'm at a no. I wouldn't recommend this blade, which is unfortunate. It had a lot going for it. But oddly, in this review, I recognize a lot of you are handier than I am, might weld this thing back on or find some way of resolving it, and the grip is still functional. You might just saw it off and continue using it. So I do want to evaluate the blade, and since the handle is still safe to use in other respects, I feel comfortable doing it, and I'm going to sharpen the blade up, at least a portion of it, see how well it cuts when I do that, see how well the edge holds up, even with my mediocre sharpening skills, and then I'll push the blade to failure, and hopefully that will give more people more insight into if it's worth the $103 asking price. So off to future math. All right, sword friends, it is the future, and I have sharpened the sword, and I have gotten a reasonable edge on it. It's at least sharper. I don't know if I'm reading my measurements correctly because it still says it's about 8 degrees, but a secondary bevel has appeared it appears shiny on my measuring device between 15 and 25 degrees roughly. So it's changed. It feels a lot sharper, but it still shows roughly the same measurement for the primary edge bevel, so I must be doing something wrong. I digress. Brought it out, put it on an 80 grit, then 120 grit, then a 600 grit because I couldn't find my 400, then a 1000 grit belt, then a strop, then honed with a ceramic piece. And that was my method for sharpening. It seemed to do better on paper, and when I brought it out to do some cutting, it chopped into a pool noodle. It bit a little bit, but it didn't really have the effect that I was hoping for. I was hoping it would pop apart. I didn't see that, and that's probably more to do with my sharpening than the sword itself. I didn't find it hard to put an edge on it. I use a belt sander. It's a pretty quick method. Nevertheless, it went on there pretty quick. It didn't seem particularly painstaking. The edge held up, though, in terms of cutting water bottles. Obviously, they're not hard to cut. I did try to strike down through the thicker parts of the plastic on the thicker jugs that I had. I missed the cap, but I still struck through it. It cut cleanly on the milk jugs. Instead of batting them around, it actually cut through them. And I left some portions on the stand. It was cutting reasonably clean, which was nice to see. I mean, these can be cut with a dull blade sometimes, but it's nice that the sharp blade is showing that it's made an improvement. And the edge seemed to sustain itself when I cut some wood and logs and things like that. It held up and didn't diminish, didn't roll. I didn't discern any problems cutting into a kind of old dead branch, and it was not a freshly cut branch, but it was frozen and kind of waterlogged, so it's not an easy target to cut through. It did it in good fashion, I would say, and didn't show any edge roll whatsoever afterwards. From there, I went to throwing it at a tree, and I did this a few times. It's a bit of a slog to get through the snow, so I didn't do it too much, and I didn't notice any issue. Now, there was an issue that actually likely happened here that I missed. I didn't notice any bending, I didn't notice any edge rolling, I didn't notice any issues with the blade or bending, but there was likely a bend here that happened in the hilt, as well as there was some chunks that came off of the grip. And note that I'm throwing it without the pommel. I left that inside because it had already come off. This likely wouldn't have happened if the pommel had been attached and secured properly, but my pommel came off, so it was able to bend this little flange area that normally overlaps the pommel a little bit. Apart from that, the hilt bend is what I missed. I did notice the degradation in the grip material, but I didn't notice that the hilt had bent. Anyway, didn't notice any other problems. It held together. There was a slight rattle in the grip. That was really about the only things that I noticed from here. The hex bolts, or the Allen bolts, I'm not sure what they're called, the little things that I have to take out with an Allen wrench that are holding the grip piece on. They were a little bit loose. I didn't notice that until I went in and actually started to take them off. They came off pretty easily and weren't tight anymore. That was probably contributing to the looseness in the grip. At the same time, to their credit, they held on and didn't come off through the duration of my aggressive testing. From there, I went to another tree that I need to take down, tried to bend the blade. It didn't bend with pressure. It didn't bend really much at all. It doesn't have a lot of flex to it. It's a pretty thick, robust blade. I chopped into this dead tree a few times, didn't notice any edge degradation, and from there, I attempted to bend the blade. And bending, I slap it on the side of a tree or something like that, and sometimes it will, even with through hardened blades, develop some sort of set or bend. I didn't notice that happen, but in pretty short order, the blade broke, and while I was slapping it on the side of the blade with, I would say, some force, but I would call it like a medium force. I'm not really swinging that hard. My elbow doesn't really let me do it that much, but I'm swinging hard enough that I wouldn't want to get hit that hard. So call it what you will, though. I would argue that it shouldn't have broken here, but it did. And in examining the grain structure, I was unable to recover the tip. Still have no idea where it is. I went out with a magnet. I was looking for it, still couldn't find it. So that'll be a fun spring project. But the grain structure didn't appear particularly coarse. It looked okay to me. That's what I was able to find anyway. It looked like a reasonably good grain structure, so I'm kind of surprised. It didn't reveal anything. I didn't see any cracks or anything that would be indicative of why it would fail at this point. I would expect bending, taking a slight set, that would be acceptable for a 1060 through hardened blade. Breaking in half, though, despite it being abusive, is still, I would say, unacceptable here. Now, bending, again, I would accept. That's what I was trying to do. It is abusive, but conceivably, you could be using this as a camp tool or something like that and strike into, a branch or something, get a bad cut, and put an equal amount of force or shock on the blade and have it potentially break. Would it happen is likely hard to say, but through potential normal use, you may encounter something of a similar level of shock in the sword. I would like it to bend and not crack in half. Now, also, it is worth noting here that I'm testing it while it's cold outside. It's a bit, well, it's below freezing, but not sub-zero quite yet, or at least it isn't while I'm testing it, but it is cold, and blades do tend to break a little quicker in the cold. Anyway, normally I would call it there. I'd say it's broken. In this case, though, there were a couple other things I wanted to do. I did have the croquet stick of doom ready. I didn't quite get to use it for its intended purpose, but I cut into it a few times just to see what would happen with the edge. The edge deformed. I would say it rolled, but also chipped a little bit. There were chunks of the edge that had come off. It penetrated about 1 millimeter into the edge, then stopped. This would be stuff that you could sharpen out conceivably, so it didn't penetrate so much that it really destroyed the edge or cracked it significantly, or big chunks came out. It would be what I would expect for a tool like this with a pretty robust and thick cross section. So like I said, penetrated about 1 millimeter-ish into the edge. I'm pretty confident I could sharpen some of that stuff out, though, so it wasn't too bad, and I was reasonably impressed with how well the edge held up. I also took the grip off. It was secured on with an Allen wrench. You need 2 Allen wrenches to take it off. They're little screw bits that come together, a nut and a bolt. Anyway, something like that. I can't remember the name of these particular things, but I used an Allen wrench, took them out, had to bend the tang a little bit so the handle would come off. The sub-hilt, the cross guard, the other little grip section between the sub-hilt, all of them came off reasonably easy, and it looks like it gives you options for customization. So if you were thinking about customizing it, this is pretty easy to take off. You would unscrew the pommel, take those bolts out, and then you'd have the opportunity to change the grip to something maybe you like more and make one yourself. That's not a thing I do in particular, but I can understand that some people aren't going to like this plasticky grip. Overall, I thought it held together reasonably well, with the exception of the pommel coming off, obviously. And in my case, it looks like the pommel, or the threaded area that was welded on, which incidentally has what looks like a pretty clean weld, was just sanded too flat, and there wasn't enough teeth in terms of the bit that's the threaded section had been sanded off, and more or less I don't think bit into the pommel, and thus the only thing holding it on was adhesive. So I think mine might have a manufacturing flaw. It doesn't seem like a lot of people have this issue, but it was persistent. Mine, I had the pommel fall off because it was only held on with adhesive. But anyway, not a way for me to really fix that. Just a side note, I suppose I could weld something on, but I don't know how to do that. I don't have the tools to do it. So anyway, that is what the tang looked like. It does appear to be tempered differently because it bent than the rest of the blade. So that's what I can show you anyway, and some observations about it. Hopefully that much has been helpful. I should answer the question, though, now, do I personally think it's worth it or not? And $103 is not a huge amount of money. It's certainly a budget-conscious blade, but there are too many things that went wrong here for me to say it's a good value or safe to use, frankly. The pommel coming off would already be kind of a nope, deal breaker. It can't come apart while I'm using it for more or less what its intended purpose is. And I think when the pommel came off, I hadn't really done anything too aggressive with the blade yet, at least not that would warrant the pommel basically falling off. And clearly it looks like the threaded section was sanded down too much, and it wasn't grabbing onto the threaded portion of the pommel, and only adhesive was holding it on. There wasn't any kind of mechanical connection. So I would say that in and of itself would be bad. But the blade breaking is the other kind of elephant in the room here. And I would say it broke prematurely. It's fine to bend, to take a set, to diminish, to roll a little bit while I'm slapping it hard on the side of the tree against the flat of the blade. I'm not expecting it to come out of that unscathed, but I am expecting it not to break in half, particularly with a through-hardened blade. Springing back to shape and or taking some sort of minor set would be appropriate given that activity. Breaking in half, even with the cold, not really acceptable. And unfortunately, there's no clear indicator of failure in manufacture here. I don't know if maybe it was just too hard. That would be my guess, but that also would need to be addressed before I would say yes. If those two things were addressed, though, then yeah, I think it has a really compelling, cool shape. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. The edge wasn't great, but a lot of things in the $100 price point with this kind of sword would, or blades like this, you may have to address sharpening if you want something better yourself. So I can kind of forgive that. And the rest of it seemed to be compelling and overall pretty good. And like I said, it held up and it was fun. It came with a scabbard. There's really a lot offered here in kind of a cool little package for $100. It just has kind of two, for me, glaring quality issues. Anyway, that's what I can offer you. To me, it's a no, but with the potential to be a yes if some QC issues are addressed. Anyway, that's all I've got. If you have any interest, again, it's linked in the description down below. Thank you to BudK for sending it my way for the purposes of review. Hopefully all of you enjoyed it and found this either interesting, entertaining, or useful in some way. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.